Hi there. My name's Shane. I am currently an owner of a 2023 Lucid Air Touring, and recently I got to take part in the I-90 Surge by Out of Spec Studios. If you haven't heard what that is, essentially it was a race between 10 different cars, 9 electric vehicles, and 1 combustion car to see who could get from Seattle, Washington to Boston, Massachusetts on I-90 the fastest without stopping. So I will leave links to all those videos in the description below. I highly recommend checking them out. Included in that will be a podcast I did with my fellow teammates, kind of discussing, some of the overall strategy, um, things that happened along the way, and some of the successes and failures we had along the way as well. So I'd highly recommend checking all of those out. So I just wanted to make a video to kind of summarize the trip, kind of step by step a little bit more, maybe dive into some of these data points a little bit more, and just kind of help summarize it for people that maybe don't want to watch over 10 hours of videos to see just how the Lucid did. So essentially what I've got here is our charging logs throughout the trip. I've also got our route kind of mapped out in PlugShare. So purple is our actual charging stops that we stopped at, and then orange are high-powered chargers along the route. So we'll see what other options we might have had along the way. So before we dive into the actual race itself, let's just talk for a quick second about some of the preparation that I did, that the rest of the team did beforehand, and some of the rules of the race. So we drove a 2025 Lucid Air Grand Touring. This was the exact car that the Out of Spec guys used on their 70 mile per hour range test to go over 500 miles without stopping. Um, One thing that I think is interesting to note is that this exact car was put on a flatbed, taken from Fort Collins, Colorado, up to Seattle before the race to avoid DC charging as much as possible before the actual race, due to the fact that the car does have a DC counter. So the few days before the race, it was charged up on AC as much as possible. And so one thing I personally did to kind of help prepare for the race was I made a Google sheet. I kind of outlined all of the chargers I could find along the way. So I split it up into states. So we've got whatever town or city it's located in, the elevation, the address of the charger, how far it is off of an I-90. So just things I thought would be really important to know when we're deciding, like, okay, which charger do we want to shoot through next? And this thing was extremely helpful throughout the race. So as far as rules of the race, there was really only one rule. So maximum speed was 10 miles per hour over the posted speed limit with a cap of 85 miles an hour. And so throughout the race, teams were trying to maintain this maximum speed as much as possible. All right, and with that, let's jump into the beginning of the trip. So we started in Seattle, Washington at the Starbucks headquarters parking lot right here. So we can see there was a charge point charging station here that we used to get all the cars to 100% instead of charged before leaving. Once we were all at 100%, we lined up, left the parking lot, and we were on the road. So I-90 just starts right up here. So pretty cool. So not much interesting happening through here. Was absolutely beautiful coming up here into the Cascade Mountains. So I'd highly recommend checking out the video to see some of those views. So, um, really nobody was needing to charge for quite a while because we were all at 100%. I think maybe one or two teams stopped here in Ritzville to charge. I think most people, however, were going clear over to Spokane and Spokane Valley to charge. Luckily for us, we've got the most range out of any of the vehicles here, so we skipped all of this, made all the way to Idaho before needing to stop, and we made it to Smelterville, Idaho, right here. So there was an Electrify America at a Walmart here, so right off the freeway, just down the road a little bit, so not in a bad location. So we arrived at 13% state of charge, coming down from 100%. We saw a 315 kilowatt peak. At this point, we were in first place, which was awesome. And not much really else to say here. So we charged for 24 minutes, had a great session, hopped back on the road, and we were off to our next destination. So one thing to note here actually is the increases in elevation, especially as you're going through Montana, Wyoming. So coming up from Seattle, we've gone up about 2,000 feet in elevation. And then going up into Butte, we were going over another 3,000 feet up. So we were keeping a close eye on these elevation changes and trying to account for that to make sure we um, had enough juice to maintain speed. So we charged up to 75% state of charge from Smelterville, hit the road, and our target was Butte, Montana. And so we can see very little charging options through this stretch. So the next stop was in Missoula, Montana. This is where a lot of people had to stop. And so you can see how far this is off the highway compared to some of these other ones. So we wanted to avoid this as much as possible. And it ended up being that a lot of teams ended up getting stuck here. So it was good for us that we avoided this. So we continued on up into the mountains, still going. And here we are in Butte, Montana. So we arrived at a 2% state of charge, so pretty dang low. And we did have to reduce our speeds a little bit to make sure we make it, but um, had plenty to make it there. Saw a peak charging speed of 319 kilowatts. We're still in first place at this point, and we'll note our efficiency. This is the lowest it was throughout the trip, and that makes sense because we were going up over 3,000 feet from where were through Montana, Wyoming. Those are where these big swings in elevation were. So this stop in Butte, really great, literally right off the highway, kind of in the back of this little Flying J gas station. So really great location here. Had a great session. So we did a short, roughly 20 minute, so 19-minute stop, hit the road. And I think it was at this point where we actually started losing our adaptive cruise control and highway assist, which made this night really long. It was pretty rough. So we could not use adaptive cruise at all. And that was for the next few stops. So that made things a little bit difficult through this stretch. So our next destination was Billings. So as we can see, another big charging desert here. So um, there was an Electrify America in Bozeman. So a few people stopped here. All right, so continuing on, we finally made it to Billings. So Charger was up here on the east side of town. It was a little ways off the highway. And unfortunately for us, we were really stretching it to this charger. So we actually exited down here on the west side of town because we were pretty close to 0% state of charge. And we actually arrived at the charger at 0%. So definitely undercharged a little bit here in Butte. Could have gone up to probably like 65, and that would have helped us a lot because we did have to reduce speeds. And at this point, the Taycan did get out in front of us, so now we were in second place. So we kind of gently made our way through town, made it up to the Charger, and this was the last time we saw the Taycan. They were really pushing it hard. They were getting great speeds, and they kept that up through the rest of the trip. So I'm pretty sure this is the last time they saw any of the other teams. So they were well out ahead of everybody the rest of the way. And so unfortunately, this is where I made my little rookie mistake. So as we were charging, we were aiming, for about 60% state of charge. It's midnight, it's way past my bedtime, so I'm tired. I ended up looking at the screen for the charger. I saw a 60. I thought that meant our state of charge. We ended up plugging and driving away. Turns out that was actually our remaining time to reach 100% state of charge. So, luckily, we didn't end up losing too much time. We only made it, like down the street a light or two. So maybe like 5 minutes we lost. We had to double back, plug back in, got up to 70% state of charge before we finally hit the road and moved on. So, our next stop was Gillette, Wyoming. So, finally getting out of Montana, this is where we saw probably at least like 50 deer. It was crazy. They were just everywhere. And so, this night was definitely the roughest because we did not have adaptive cruise and we were trying to dodge all these deer. So, it was pretty crazy. But eventually made it to Gillette. You can see it's right off the highway, pretty close, so not a bad location. So we arrived at 8% state of charge and saw a peak of 315 kilowatts. At this point, the Model 3, the Taycan, and the Model S Plaid were just a little bit ahead of us. So we were in fourth place here. Um, had a decent session, nothing too noteworthy here, just middle of the night in the middle of Wyoming. So jumped back on the road, and now we're shooting for South Dakota. So at this point, this is where elevation kind of starts leveling off a little bit, so not as much of a concern through the rest of the trip here. So we can see there's stop in Rapid City that a few teams stopped at. We were able to skip that, and we kept on going to Wall, South Dakota. So as you can see, another stop immediately off the highway right over here by this gas station. So this is where the cool little dinosaur is over here. So we arrived at a 14% state of charge. So maybe overcharged a little bit here, but nothing too bad. Saw a peak speed of 319 kilowatts. We were in third place, so Taycan and Model 3 were ahead of us. And it was after this point that we finally got our adaptive cruise back. So that was fantastic. So next stop is Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So jumping back on the highway, still not many charging options out here. So this part of the trip was, there wasn't a ton of optimization to be had other than just charging enough to keep speeds up. So there was this cycle shop in Chamberlain that several teams stopped at. We skipped that one. Keep on going. Keep on going. And here we are in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So this one, it's a little ways off the highway, really not too bad. So this one was at a Quality Inn, so not the greatest amenities, but so we arrived at a 0% state of charge again. So we had to reduce speeds a little bit through this section back here to make it. We hit zero, probably like 3 miles or so away. So definitely digging into the buffer a little bit, but not too bad at this point. So this is actually one of our worst charging sessions we had. So this was in the middle of the day. I think it was in like the low to mid 80s Fahrenheit. Um, so we arrived at 0%, and when we plugged in, the peak speed we saw was 245 kilowatts. And using the API, I noted that cell temp was up in the mid 50s Celsius, so close to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So the battery was absolutely roasting at this point. And this is something I've seen with my own car after, multiple back-to-back fast charging sessions, when, temperatures are, above like 80, 85 degrees or so. It's not too hard to get these batteries toasty, and I think it certainly does reduce our charging speed. And one thing I thought was really interesting is that we charged for 36 minutes, which was our by far our longest charging stop. Per the charging unit, it dispensed over 90 kilowatt hours of energy, and we only made it up to 69%. And so my theory is that a lot of this energy that was being delivered by the charger was going to the battery management system to try and cool this thing down. So we were on the hook for a lot longer than we should have, and that kind of cost us a lot of time through here. So after an unfortunately long charging session, finally got back on I-90 and we were headed for Stewartville, Minnesota. So as you can see, it is night, it's flat, straight road, nothing too interesting to look at. So went by Albert Lee and finally made it up here to Stewartville, Minnesota. The stop was a little ways off the highway, so maybe like a mile or so. So not perfect, but not the worst either. So we were just at this Electrify America at this Fairway grocery store. We arrived at 8% state of charge. Saw a peak speed of 329, so our best speed so far, and still in third place. So basically, for the rest of the trip, the Taycan was in first, Model 3 was second, we were in third. That kind of stayed pretty consistent throughout. Um, we just did a quick little splash and dash here, so we only charged for 10 minutes, left at 44% state of charge, trying to maximize the charging curve as much as we could through here. And we were off the road again to Toma, Wisconsin. So back on I-90, going over and up into Toma, Wisconsin. So this one was a decent ways off the highway. We were even going on I-94 a little bit for a couple of miles to get up to this charger at another Walmart. Um, so we arrived at 11% state of charge, saw a peak speed of 339, beating our previous one again, which was awesome. And just another really quick splash and dash session. But yeah, so great charging session here. So back on the road to Rockford, Illinois this time. So hop down back onto I-90. So we skipped this one here in Mauston, kept on going. So we had some here in Madison, Wisconsin. Tried to avoid these because we figured these would be busy. Kept on going. And here we are in Rockford, Illinois. So maybe about a mile or so off the highway, maybe a little bit more. Not too bad. So this was in a Sam's Club parking lot. Um, and we reached here at 13% state of charge. And we had another kind of not so great session here. So we saw a peak speed of 248 kilowatts. So the first unit we plugged into peaked at like, I think that might have been the peak speed we saw there. We switched to another unit. We're having the same thing. So I don't know if it was just derated chargers, if we were having thermal issues again. Maybe the DC counter had something to do with this. I don't really know, but most likely the chargers, I would say in this case. Um, so we tried to stay here for as short a time as possible since we were not getting ideal speeds. So we charged for 15 minutes and we were off to Mishawaka, Indiana. So just close to Notre Dame on this one. So now we can see as we start getting in the Chicago area, we have a lot more fast charging options popping up. So we went past those. So we actually made it through the entire Chicago area without stopping, which was by design. We did not want to worry about getting stuck on busy chargers here in the Chicago area. So kept on going through. We did start to see a little bit of rain through like Indiana and the first part of Ohio, so that kind of reduced our efficiency a little bit. But we did eventually make it to Mishawaka. So this was around midnight again, so we were at 11% state of charge. Saw a peak speed of 329 kilowatts, still in third place, and not much else to say about this one. It was a little kind of short detour off the highway. It was at least kind of following the highway. But it was a little ways off, so not ideal. But it was at least out of the Chicago area and it was the middle of the night, so the chargers were completely empty. So, um, after 19 minutes of charging, we hopped back on the road yet again, and we were targeting Sheffield, Ohio. So back on the I-90 over to Ohio. So There are a lot of these Flying J EVGOs, which I wish we had have utilized a little bit more. Kept on going until finally over to Lake Erie and to Sheffield, Ohio. So this one, pretty much just right off the exit at another Electrify America. So we arrived at 0% state of charge on this one. I don't think we had to reduce speeds too much to reach this one. So I think we optimized that one pretty well. We weren't dipping down into the buffer too much or losing too much speed. Um, Unfortunately, again, our peak speed was below 300 kilowatts. I don't know if it was thermal derated chargers again, but not quite as bad as the one we had in Rockford or in Sioux Falls. So charged here for 20 minutes and hit the road again. And now we were starting to get into New York. So we're targeting Fredonia for this one. And so unfortunately, this is where things really kind of started falling apart for us. So in this part of the country, we're starting to see a lot more charging options. So this was where charging location and distance off the highway were really starting to matter. So we made it here to Fredonia, New York. Right off the highway again, decent spot. At another Walmart. Yippee. We arrived at 4% state of charge. We saw, and unfortunately for this one, where this is the first time we weren't able to get a 350 kilowatt unit. There were supposed to be two 350s and two 150s. Unfortunately, both of the 350s were not working, and we were stuck on a 150. So we saw a peak speed of 174 kilowatts, still in third place, luckily, but the only unit, 350 kilowatt unit that was listed as available was not actually working. So we charged here just for 12 minutes. We really didn't want to stay here any longer than we absolutely had to. So after about 12 minutes, we unplugged and we were on to what we hoped would be the next good set of 350s, which was in Victor, New York. So hit the road again. So going along the lake, coming up by Niagara Falls. So we skipped some of these in Cheektowaga. Um, so what I really wish we could have or had used more are these little travel plaza exits. Those are fantastic. This was on the westbound side of the highway, but after this point there were several right on the eastbound side. So here's another Flying J. That would have been a great stop. So going on, and finally to Victor. So not too far off the highway. Definitely not as close as those little travel plazas are, but um, this is where I kind of failed the idiot check a little bit, I think. So for whatever reason, I thought there were three 350 kilowatt units here. Apparently there was only one, and the one that was actually working was being used by an EV6. So fortunately, we got stuck on two 150s right in a row here in New York. So we arrived at 4% state of charge. Again, saw a peak speed of 174 kilowatts. And so, unfortunately for us, this is where things really started to fall apart for us. So again, since we were stuck on a 150 kilowatt unit, we were trying to limit the amount of time we were on this charger as much as possible because we were getting right up here towards the end. We're at the last one or two charging stops. So we knew Taycan was going to win at this point. We didn't feel like we could catch up to the Model 3, but we were trying really, really, really hard to keep the Ioniq 6 and the Model S Plaid that were right on our tail at this point. So we made the tough call to unplug at 51% state of charge to limit the time we were at this charger in order to make it to Albany. So unplugged, hit the road, and we skipped this little Apple Green station that had this little travel plaza, so that would have been a much better place to stop and charge. Kept on going. So there's the Waterloo one. So that was a little bit off the highway. So we got up into Syracuse. There's a few that are a little ways off. And so now we're here in Herkimer. I think this is where the Tycon did their last or second to last stop. We ended up skipping another Apple Green station right off the interstate, which is absolutely painful because that would have been a really good option. But we felt like we had enough state of charge to keep on going and make it into Albany. So kept on cruising along, and about down here, so we're about 6 to 7 miles outside of Albany, where we started losing speed. We had hit 0% state of charge. We were hoping we had at least 10 miles of buffer below zero, but for whatever reason, possibly due to BMS sway this far into the trip, we did not have that much range below zero, and we started losing speed quickly. So we made the tough decision to get off of the highway for safety's sake at this little travel plaza. And of course, it's one that doesn't have any charging options whatsoever. So this was basically game over for us. So, um, and again, I kind of blame myself for this a little bit. So for whatever reason, I don't know if we just didn't double check the math when we were lifting Victor, but I kind of looked through it a little bit here in this section. So when we left Victor, we were expecting to go 206 miles to Albany. We left at 51% state of charge. And based on our average efficiency of 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour, that only equated to 198.6 miles. So that kind of makes sense why we died where we did. I don't know if we just forgot to do a calculation at this point. Um, I'm not really sure what happened in this one. So if we had slowed down a little bit, maybe got like 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour, we would have just barely made it. But unfortunately, we didn't reduce speed enough in time to be able to make it. So our estimated arrival at this point was 11:49 a.m. on September 29th. Couldn't maintain 70 miles per hour, about 7 miles away from Albany, and that's where we died. So we got stuck at this little travel plaza. Um, we found a little 110 outlet to plug into in this little building right here for at least a few minutes. We did know that there was this little service road back here, so we ended up getting a key from the manager of the Starbucks over here, which was awesome because we thought we had enough charge to make it from this little travel plaza down through these neighborhoods to this little EVgo right here. So we wanted to stay off the highway, obviously, because we couldn't go more than like 50 miles an hour. We wanted to keep everybody safe. So we got the keys, opened up the gate to the service road, kind of were winding our way through these little neighborhood roads, and unfortunately, that's where we died completely. So the car would not move anymore. So we called the tow truck, waited for quite a while. Um, so we died, it was like 11:40 or so is when we got to that travel plaza, and it was clear until 3:11 when we actually finally got plugged in again. So obviously we're at 0%. It was just a little 50 kilowatt unit. So just stayed on the hook long enough to get back on the road and try and make it to the finish line. So we hopped back on the road here, finally got back on the I-90, crossed over the Hudson to an Electrify America over here by a Target station, not too far off the highway. So ideally, our last charging stop would have been back here in Albany. So you can see how close we were. So here's the charging station right here. That's where we had to pull off. And you can see there's this one in Schenectady up here that would have been, we maybe could have coasted into, probably not, but so this is where poor choice of chargers really let us down, and also just simply not charging long enough. So that was our biggest mistakes through here, obviously. So over here in Renslayer, however you pronounce that, we arrived at 12% state of charge, had a peak speed of 333 kilowatts, so great session, charged for 22 minutes, left at 64% state of charge, and we were off to Boston. So that was our last charging stop for reaching Boston. So we crossed the finish line over here by the USS Constitution. Here's the finish line right here. So we arrived, roughly 3.5 to 4 hours later than we had initially thought. And so, kind of based on that, I was guessing like we were probably going to get fifth place overall at the pace we were maintaining up here. So, fourth place if you're just counting the EVs. So, if we arrived between like 3:30 and 4, we would have been, somewhere around the Plaid, hopefully a little bit before. So, not quite as good as the Taycan or the Model 3. If we had optimized much better, we probably could have beat the Ioniq 6 and maybe even got pretty close to the Model 3, because the Model 3 and the Ioniq 6 weren't even that far apart. But there is absolutely no way we were ever going to catch up with the Taycan, unfortunately. And so I just crunched a few different little numbers over here just to see like what the differences between us and the Taycan were, and like why their pace was so much faster than ours. So I looked at the average kilowatts delivered by the charger. So those were actually pretty close between the two teams. So for each charging session, we actually dispensed about the same amount of energy. Um, the thing is, due to their insane charging curve, they were putting on almost 4.5 kilowatt hours every minute, and we were only doing 3.3. And so for our average charging sessions, we were just under 20 minutes, and theirs was 15 minutes. And so over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 charging stops, that adds up to a decent amount of time. And one thing that I thought was also interesting is that their departure state of charge was much higher, because they can maintain over 300 kilowatts over 60%, whereas we're down below 150 kilowatts at that point. So that's where I think their advantage played a huge, that's what gave them such a huge advantage at this point. And so that was it. So you can see we arrived here in eighth place, about an hour after the Genesis and about 45 minutes ahead of the BMW i7, which is absolutely hilarious. Um, our average trip efficiency was about 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour, so not amazing. So unfortunately, in these races and the increased speeds, especially for the Lucid, the efficiency really is not anywhere near um, what it would be if you're going 65 or 70 miles per hour. And so what's interesting to note is that actually the Taycan's efficiency was just 3.0 miles per kilowatt hour, so even not that less efficient than we were, um, which really played into their advantage quite a bit. And so at the end of the day, there's obviously plenty of stuff that Team Lucid could have done better. We could have picked better charging options, especially in the last third of the race, and overall maybe charged a little bit longer to help keep speeds up and not get too close to zero. But I definitely don't think there's many teams that were really pushing it harder than we were. So I'm really proud of that. Yeah, we could have done things a bit smarter, but we were really trying to do the car justice and to push it as hard as we could so that it could place as well as it could. So at least feel good about that. And at the end of the day, we can't say enough good things about the Lucid. The fact that the shortest person in the car was me at 6 foot tall, and we were still all incredibly comfortable. We felt fantastic at the end of the trip. I think that speaks a lot to how amazing this car is. And really, my only complaint about the Lucid specifically was the route planning. So as we were leaving chargers, it was pretty consistent that we would arrive, with like 5, 10, 15% less data charge than what the car thought we would arrive with. So I think the issue is that it's being a little too conservative when you're first leaving the charging station and not accounting for previous efficiency strongly enough. So as you would drive at your given speeds, for like 15 to 30 minutes, it would, you'd see your state of charge arrival continuously drop and then finally level out after a while. But it is a little frustrating to see it not really know or just kind of have a lack of confidence a little bit. So I'd like to see that dialed in a little bit better and maybe have the car weigh in previous efficiency a little more heavily. So I think that wraps it up pretty well. So thank you very much for watching. Huge shout outs to Kyle and everyone else at Out of Spec for being such awesome people and for inviting me to join along. And extra special shout out to Alex and Dave for being the best teammates I could have hoped for. They really made the trip a memory I'll never forget. So, again, thank you. I'm going to leave links in the description below for all the I-90 surge videos, as well as the charging log here in case you want to take a look at the data yourself. So, thanks again. Take care.